beneath I call you a freak. Motherland above, you should think of respect is the least of what you should receive for sharing your love. Maybe you need to leave your hair curls, remove the makeup.
Peace and welcome to the Anu Life Global Ministries Womb Room series, where we will explore matters relevant to women seeking the exploration of righteous culture. I am Ima Yakira Eden, and to my right is Akoti Maria.
Peace, everyone. Greetings.
And Akoti Yafe.
Peace.
So there are many creation stories, and the most popular, of course, is the Genesis story. But that is just one of so many. And this evening, we have the pleasure, and when I say we, I want to introduce us properly. We represent the House of Yuya. So today, we are going to be sharing with you one of the very, very early creation stories with a slight spin. We'll be sharing the Sumerian story of the Anunnaki, or the Anu, also described as the sky people. But we are going to present this story from the lens of femininity and where that relevant balance lies between the feminine and the masculine. So with that, I'll open up the story, really just sharing a bit about what happened in the beginning, or in this iteration of a beginning. And what that would entail is us starting from a place of nothing, right? So we have Anu, and Anu actually means heaven, and that is what was present before anything. From Anu, we get to, well, actually, in the Anu way, it actually speaks about what Anu is. And it says, the Anu are highly evolved people who have been noted as models among the aggregation of world nations and cultures. The initial thing that happens in this creation story called Anu is that in the beginning, there was a separation of the waters. And I'm going to share a bit about the feminine aspect of that separation. So with that division, there was fresh water, which we'll call Abzu. And of course, we know fresh water connects to well water, streams, lakes, springs, even the idea of groundwater. It's all anything that is, it's pretty much already filtered, right? And what's filtered out is that salt. So the complement to that fresh water is salt water. And in this story, we'll call salt water Tiamat. And so what I want to begin this dialogue with, because, you know, we don't have a particular flow that we're going for here, is to acknowledge that salt water connects with two things, water and salt. And one of the first things that I considered when exploring the idea of salt water is the womb. So we have this female archetype, or this female energy called Tiamat, representing salt water, which means that that masculine archetype, or that Abzu or fresh water, is just that. With that salt water, of course, I think of the womb. And an interesting thing about the womb is that the amniotic fluid also is a component of water and salt. So again, the same entity, or the same forces that brought forth salt water, is also what when we, the woman, incubate a fetus, it's also within that same saltwater body.
Yeah, and you bring up amniotic fluid, and I instantly think of ocean water and the minerals, right? It is. Because you say salt, and I'm like, we all just think salt, and we neglect sometimes to think about how mineral dense salt water is and the additional healing properties that it has, and then thinking about submerging into salt water or seawater. It feels like a womb. Well, any water for that matter. So your point about the amniotic fluid and what it does, it just brought me back to that idea of additional minerals and mineral density and nutrients.
I was more pulled to the groundwater, right? Because as you said, it's filtered. When we have the fresh water, in the groundwater becomes fresh water through like all of those natural filters, right? And it made me think like when we're talking about crops, and because we also look at the feminine energy of the female, the woman is like being earth, and thinking about like what seeds are planted in and then what comes out. And not only is there fresh water that is being poured into her, from above, but also thinking of that groundwater, that fresh water that, some plants have to pull from, all plants have to pull from like in the ground, once that salt filtered. So it just goes to show like, while, we might have Tiamat as the female energy in that salt water, it just goes to show like, even in this example of this story, how fresh water is what actually promotes the cultivation and the growth.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So that both of you shared. What's interesting is that no matter how a species comes to being, water is always relevant. It's a pillar, right? It has to be there. It has to be there, as does that masculine and that feminine energy, in order for life to even begin to spring forth. The other piece that I thought was interesting is exactly what you said, Akoti Maria. The natural crystal salts contain the exact same minerals and nutrients as the salt that flows through our body, right? And so again, nothing is life forming without water. And then that, like what we carry through our body, all of those components as far as nutrients lives in salt. So when we think about the relationship between the two, or even when I think about my youth really early on, just doing simple experiments with like, what happens when we put salt in water, right? What does it taste like? What happens when that evaporates? What does it turn into? Exploring each component of that gives us an understanding of what Tiamat represents and what flows from that experience. So we know that Tiamat and Abzu come together and form what we know as the Anunnaki, right? They form those first sky people.
The powerful ones.
Yes.
The powerful ones. And like we'll continue with the story. So as this, and we know the Sumerian tale, right? Because we have been given those 3 parts to the Sumerian tale already. We know it. So we know after this we have, a fight, and then, Enlil comes through, and Ki, his brother, becomes the one who is given the charge to create children, to create humans, rather, people. And in doing so, we see complementarity again. We see that presence of the masculine principle coming together to initiate alongside Nama, who is that feminine principle. So again, we see another section in the story where that balance reemerges again, and that complementarity becomes necessary. Apart from that section of the story, we see Inky coming together again with another feminine principle. This is what is so powerful about the story, that constant balance and complementarity coming through over and over again. he joins with who's called Ninursag. And so just a little bit about Ninursag. Ninursag, of course, is a Sumerian deity, but this deity, I think, is powerful. This deity was, revered in the city of Kish. And so I had to look up, well, where was Kish? And so Kish it was Sumer, actually, which is modern day Iraq. And so she was a deity that was revered for fertility, but her name actually means stony and rocky ground, rocky ground. All right. So I was like, why stone and rock? But at the same time, when we hear the name Ninursag, we think, nurturing, we think nurse. However, I realized like stony and rocky ground is earth itself. So when we talk, the point you made earlier, Sister Yafe, about, the fact that fresh water actually allows or helps that earth to give plants what it needs to grow. I could see that nurturing component of that feminine aspect constantly alongside the masculine principle, and the other thing that I thought was profound was that she is actually the deity of power over wildlife, wildlife. I was like, how did this connect so effortlessly with the concept or the idea that the very first humans were made and they were in the wild, right? So we have this Ninursag, who's also called Ninma. I wanted to make sure I wasn't saying that. Ninma. You have that too, right? If you want to jump in and share anything about Ninma, you can. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll say this. I know one of the breakdown, well, for the name Ninursag, I know it's also acknowledging a breakdown between mountain and lady. So the Nin being the lady piece and the Hersag being that mountain. And I know that, oftentimes when I first saw that, I even had the visual of images that we see on social media where a mountain is actually crafted into like Mother Nature being pregnant. And I thought of that, of that expectancy being that mountain when I recognized the name, or even the idea of an infant suckling right at a mother's breast, and that also representing that, that lady and the mountain. So yeah, I'll leave Ninma. I did have that. I'll leave that up to you.
No, you could jump in, add more, because looking into Ninursag actually made me realize that this, we say it, and you said it at the beginning, that this is a very ancient creation story. Actually, it would be the creation story that every other creation story was fashioned off after. And then think about how many churches to this day have the lady of this and the lady of that statue. And there we have it, the original lady of, Ninursag herself. So, there are other names. I think another one was exalted deity. Right. And I think that one with ladies also exalted lady. And, she is a representation of mother. And her name also means mother of all children. So it's like all children. So who are these children? Who are these children in this incubator? Because when she shares the story, he speaks of Enki having this incubator and collaborating with Ninursag. And reading Rocky Mount again and the rock and relating it to Earth, I'm like, Earth is an incubator for creating. And these people are created from clay as well too. And what do we think of when we hear Adam? We think of Earth, we think of clay. So those things are really powerful, because now we see that the Sumerian deities that we're talking about, the Tiamat and the Nama and the Ninursag, they represent those ideas the beginning ideas of fertility, of nurturing, of childbirth, because you're making that connection that's so powerful with, pregnancy and the amniotic fluid. And I think those are consistent throughout the story.
Yeah, it's interesting. Only thing I wanted to add to that was like when first hearing about the nurse tag and thinking about her as a nurse, but also understanding it in context of the story, I thought incubators as well. I literally, my mind went to like NICU, like, this is the nurse who is in the NICU, like attending to all these little creations, making sure that they make it.
Yeah, I think that is a common thread with the three like female entities, if you will, that we're going to cover. Because even thinking about Tiamat, if you look at images, like if you pull up an image of Tiamat, she's often described as a dragon, right? Or having like a winged creature that resembles, in my opinion, it took me to the idea of the Leviathan.
Yeah.
And of course that's, referenced in scripture. But in acknowledging what the Leviathan, in recognizing what the reference to the Leviathan and unknown creatures would mean, and connecting it to Tiamat, having a similar form, right, as that sea creature, it made me consider how ancient, right, how this ancient component of salt water is already existing in the salt water that exists at the time of this story of Genesis. But also just thinking about the depths of salt water, and it also, when you go down really deep, it's super, super dark. And that darkness being that chaos, right? So that initial chaos, from just the very beginning of creation. And similarly, Tiamat is the mother of all of the entities that we know as the sky people, that we know as the Anunnaki. So at this point, we have the mother of the sky people, and then we have subsequently Ninhursag, who becomes the mother to the sacred hill or mountain, right, here on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that, we have some more nins. Oh, were you not? Okay,
No, go ahead. I'll introduce it as you're talking. I'll find a way.
We have some more nins to introduce. So it's interesting, like this third part that we're, introducing about the feminine principle is thinking about how the story flows, as Akoti Maria said earlier, like, go and check out the Sky People, the 3-part series. So there's this piece as we go through the story, there's that first part is the creation, right? But then we get into the creation of humankind, or the humans, the bright man, right? And it was a feminine energy or female energy that decided to civilize the wild men, because initially when they were created, they're out in the wild, they're one with nature, one with the animals. But as we know, the sky people, like, they came here for a purpose. It's like, we need somebody to, cook for us and till this soil and get this gold, right? So it's like, okay, well, how do we do that? So it was that feminine energy, or one of the council members, one of the young council members, or maybe we'll say feminine, who decided, like, well, let's bring them in and civilize them, right? And so what does that mean? And if you've ever watched any of Chief's teachings, we learned that civilization does come from the woman. The woman is the civilizer. He's mentioned it in many different podcasts. One story in particular was about a friend in college, like a roommate, who was not the cleanest, and I think he said, like, he needed a woman to come and clean for him, like, kind of get the place looking like presentable, to civilize him, to tame that wild man that's inside. So we see that correlation of the woman being the civilizer. The other part of that, we also know that civilization is also like can be account to like, you know, enslaving, because we do learn that, you know, to be a civilian is really another way of saying slave. So what were they though? They were there to till the soil. Adoma was there to till the soil. You have a job to do. I'm putting you here in this area for a reason. So they're brought into the garden to till it, to mine gold. They are brought in to civilize. And one of the nins that I was saying, we learned that, well, upon further study, which is what we should all be doing, learning that a name for one of the names for that deity or energy that, you know, kind of got wrangled the council to have them bring all the men and the beings inside. The name is Ninkasi. And the reason I bring up Ninkasi because the way they did it was bringing in beer and bread. So that Sumerian deity of beer is Ninkasi, and her name actually means mistress of beer, or the lady who fills the mouth. And if we think about like beer or, you know, any kind of alcoholic beverage, what does that do? It can inhibit your awareness. It can be like a pacifier, you know, something satisfying, filling the belly, getting you lethargic, making you lazy. Same thing with bread. And if we think about it, they have similar origins, because you need grain to make beer, you need grain to make bread. And so another entity that was the mistress of grain was Nisaba. So we have these female energies of these female deities who are seemingly responsible for that beer and bread. So that's that introduction of woman or female to mankind, you know, after they're created. And they're moving around after they're created and been moving around, right? Because they kind of been nursed already by her segment. Now they're kind of out and about, and it's like, all right, so now let's kind of give you another introduction to what that female energy is. So it can be, you know, double-sided, that understanding that civilizing can also be like the door opener to enslavement, but it's also like taming as well, you know, taming the wild human, if you will. So, and then I wanted to kind of go back to that beer part. So we know that there are stories in scriptures that give us an account of what strong drink can do. And this is why we have to like be really mindful of like, why beer and bread? There's Noah. You know, we recently watched a movie where we saw like, you know, Noah was really on that strong drink, you know, and the issues that strong drink can bring up. Also, one of the prophets, Isaiah, when there was, you know, really telling not just Jerusalem, but Judah, like, you know, you guys got to clean it up. He said, Isaiah 5:12, woe unto them that are mighty to drink wine and men of strength to mingle strong drink. You know, and in that chapter, he's talking about like, this is what I'm going to do with my vineyard. And yes, that's wine, but we're talking about that effect that strong drink can have on, you know, on the person, on people. So, yeah, like when we see the ancient history, we also find out that the beer was actually brewed by the women. So there's definitely a correlation there when we think about like that feminine energy and that civilizing, but also like, you know, being mindful of like, is it civilizing to like, you know, move forward, or is it civilizing to like, you know, tame or enslave? So, you know, and those things, you know, can both be true at the same time.
Right. You know, what you shared reminded me of that Titus charge to be sober, you know, sober minded. And I was just like, correct me if I'm wrong,
No.
but I, you know, as you were sharing, just like, that's a warning, and that warning has and continues to be an important warning even today, you know. And I do think it is very important when we discover how a thing is used, even in these stories that are myth a lot, identified as myth to some, right? Because it becomes a forever symbol. It apart from a symbol, it is also a warning, because symbols help to give us, like, they're precautionary in some cases. They give us a lot of information. And I think about how bread and beer is addictive even now, even in our own current experience of bread and beer, and how, you know, it reduces a sober mind, because bread can, as you said, can make you lethargic. It will put you to sleep if you eat, And so I think about the idea of yeast as well, but also that idea of the fermenting of grain
Yeah.
and the purpose of grain even then. And there's something else too that's interesting is you say bread and bear and you're saying it's feeding them. And I'm like, but they're nurses still. These women are now still representation of nurses because now that dome becomes the incubator. Now that dome becomes that representation of a place where we nurture you for the purpose that we have, right? And then we feed based on what your function will be,
Right.
So I think these are powerful symbols to pay attention to in terms of the feminine function and role,
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would say another connection that I was able to make is that at every single juncture, you have that energy making a provision. So they're bringing something, or they're maintaining that vessel, but it's all based on the boundaries that's already been established by that masculine energy, right? So even though we're not getting into that, everything, you can't see my hands, there's like this container, right? And everything is happening within, so it's happening in this contained environment. And I'm glad that you touched on intentionality, because it speaks even today to what we feed our family, right? And how intentional we are about what we're feeding our family, and what the agenda is behind what's been given to you, or what you're cultivating for yourself, right? Or versus, should I say, what you may be cultivating in your own garden to nourish and nurture your family. Are you nourishing them with something that is going to put you all to sleep, right? Or to kind of numb your mind and make you more drone-like, right? Or to have you function, as you've touched on, more civilized or more slave-like, or not, right? And that's the relevant, like, charge, I would say, of what we're sharing even now.
Yeah.
Do you do? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna jump in and say, like, do we as women recognize the power that we have in terms of, affecting the trajectory of the homestead and the home? And, do we ignore the fact that we are charged to be like the managers of the homestead and manage the domestic? Like, I think that's a very powerful charge, again, speaking about these ancient stories and looking at the roles and then pulling it forward and saying, oh no, wait, even back then with these ancient deities, they still understood the value of the feminine in her role, where managing the domestics, which is the nurturing, the upbringing, creating that space, managing the incubator, which is the homestead. It's like it's crucial. And when what you're speaking of in Ima Yakira Eden, when you say it's like, yes, you're carrying this thing, but it's this thing because it's been poured into by the man. And Inki is there every single time throughout the plot, connecting back to Nama, connecting back to Ninursag. I even think the original story, the name is Inki and Ninursag. And I was like, okay, that's interesting, because even in the name, they're acknowledging complementarity,
And you know what? And I wanted to just really quick, like, bring it back to, like, it was mentioned, like, the what we created you for, right? And understanding, like, those two things will exist. Like, am I civilizing you for the betterment, or am I civilizing you to make you a drone, right? So when we look at Proverbs 12:11, he that tilleth his land shall be satisfied with bread, but he that followeth vain persons is void of understanding. So there's this teaching that bread can be a reward, But then if we're managing the home as women correctly, then it should be presented as a reward, but not to be, and not saying physically bread. I'm not saying give like chicken and beer and, chicken and malt liquor and biscuits. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like, that reward for doing work, for, doing the work of the Most High, like putting yourself in that space is the reward. You get that bread. But, we want to make sure that bread is not the thing that gives you over to the enemy, if I should gives you over to Babylon, like, or makes you so fat and lazy, or maybe that wasn't the right word to say, but makes you so like, I can't really do anything, that Babylon is going to just scoop you up and you'll just be lost in the sauce.
Right. Yeah. Which it sounds like what I'm hearing is exactly what Maria touched on in Titus, right? It's the sobriety. So it's like you're not ingesting for the purpose of numbing out, right? And so it would be the charge of the woman to make sure that what her family is ingesting, and not necessarily just food, isn't going to numb our ability to create and procreate, right? Because that's ultimately what one of the goals may be, to keep you numb, but just present enough to work, right? Out whatever the mission may be, as opposed to being clear and sober-minded enough to actually understand what the true work is, right? To reflect your head, who's reflecting the Creator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What you shared, and I know we're getting ready to close, but what you shared reminded me of something that I looked at today. It was actually showing a woman speaking about observations that she made based on the foods that her child consumed and what each dye color actually did to the child, like down to the science of each color coded thing in the foods and snacks, and how it affected concentration, ability to control body, ability to stay alert versus being lethargic and falling asleep. And my point is nothing more than to reiterate what we're sharing, just considering the role of the woman and understanding that role and the importance of it alongside, that, and having that balance. I think it's important, as opposed to giving over your homestead to somebody else to man and to control and to dictate what is consumed, what is enjoyed, what is even placed as fabric in the home or on the bodies, on our body, And I pointed it out too, Ima Yukire. And it's just so profound that I couldn't help but like not make mention to it, because I'm like, whoa, to think that the creation story, this Sumerian story, is so relevant and just so profound, even in just having this little dialogue. This dialogue is not a little dialogue; it's deep, actually. Because some of the things we're even sharing, I'm coming to realize it even now in the moment. I'm like, but wait, this is connected to like these 10 other things, So
yeah. I think that the takeaway is, at least my takeaway, I should say, like what I took away from like really digging into that part was like the power that the woman has, but then also having that meaning, understanding there's a responsibility that comes with that power, because with that feeding, you can either destroy or build up your home and family.
Right. And I would say very similarly with the energy of Tiamat, when I just think about, how nurturing and what an incubator salt water can be when properly balanced, right? And we know when it's imbalanced, it is very acidic, and it will not carry or sustain or nurture much by way of life. So again, there's that duality in our charge to make sure that we are maintaining ourselves and cultivating our being receptive enough to allow our minds and our spirit to be nurtured and clean, so that we don't become acidic and toxic, and therefore creating the wrong environment, an unattractive environment for life to even spring forth.
Okay, I mean, these are only short, super mini. How many times did I say short? Presentations and builds that we're going to do. We will that you all enjoyed our conversation on the sky people from the perspective of that masculine and feminine principle coming together, and also, you know, the ways that we have highlighted the feminine principle. And we will that, you know, for the other womb room presentations, you will find yourself in the comment section. Like, share, and subscribe, but also leave a comment, leave a question. If there are any thoughts that you have had while listening to this video, share it please in the comment section below. See you again for another episode of the Womb Room. Peace, everyone.
Peace.